So, what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about how Richard III stole the throne of England. Aside from possibly murdering small children, that's a whole other topic that could do with its own video. So we're going to talk about all the other stuff.
Okay, I'll bite. What's a Richard III?
Richard III was an English king who was a member of the House of York during the Wars of the Roses. He was the brother of Edward IV and George, the Duke of Clarence. Despite the fact that Edward IV had left 2 healthy sons when he died, Richard surprised everyone by taking the throne for himself, and neither of the boys were the crown. Despite the brevity of Richard III's reign, he's been immortalised in literature and popular culture, probably most famously as a Shakespearean villain.
Alright, so what were the Wars of the Roses?
It was a series of conflicts between different branches of the royal family, beginning in 1455 and ending in 1487, 2 years after Richard III died. The name Wars of the Roses comes from the 2 symbols used by the different branches of the houses. People would wear these symbols on them to signify who they'd given their allegiance to. So a white rose for the House of York and a red rose for the House of Lancaster.
So people are just walking around like with a rose on them. just like, you know, this like how people have band T-shirts today. They're just like, oh yes, I like Iron Maiden or something. I'm showing my age, aren't I? What's a band that people like in like 2020?
Is One Direction still a thing, or are they too old?
I think they are. So like, rather than walking around with like a One Direction T-shirt, like, oh yes, I'm a Directionist or whatever they call themselves, that people would be walking around like just with a white rose, like, yeah, York bitches.
Something like that, yes.
Okay.
I'm just imagining like old, Twilight Team Edward T-shirts and Team Jacob T-shirts, except these people were willing to kill each other.
Well, I mean, I won't put much. Some Twilight fans, you know.
This civil war loomed over Richard III's entire childhood. At the time, England was ruled by Henry VI. He turned out to be a weak and incompetent king. He was very unpopular with the nobility, thanks to a corrupt government, these huge losses in French territories, which the English had owned. So.
Okay, that's news to me. How much of France did we own, and when are we getting it back?
Oh, we've been trying to get this back for a long time, I think. Pretty sure even the Tudors, like 200 years later, were still calling themselves the Kings of France. We've basically had these huge chunks, which I can't name off the top of my head, but I will put up on a map. From 1422, we had huge chunks of the south of France, some in the north, kind of sandwiching actual French territories. And by the 1450s, we had Calais. That is it.
That's a pretty big loss, isn't it?
Yeah. When your power and self-esteem relies on being able to conquer huge chunks of land and to piss off the French, as a nobleman, you're going to find that really hard to stomach.
Yeah.
So you can see where they might have
And also, if you've lost the south of France, where are people going to go for their hollybobs?
I know, right? Like, they weren't going to go to Morecambe. They were too good for that. The discontent of the nobility opened up opportunity to someone to dethrone Henry VI. This was the era of the overmighty subject. These noblemen, often cousins of Henry, had such a large following and had accumulated so much wealth that it actually rivaled those of the kings. There was no strict law regarding the succession of the throne.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that, because you kind of said Richard III surprised everyone by taking the throne for himself. Like, how does one do that? How do you just go, surprise, I'm king now? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, well, the thing is, because there was no written law saying who would directly succeed, it was open to interpretation. So, say, did the uncles of the previous king or brothers take precedent over the sons of that king? Did the firstborn child take precedent, even if it was a female? All these things left it open to a squabbling. The succession was open to whoever had the best claim, just so long as the person had been born into wedlock. Richard III and his brothers happened to be some of these powerful cousins of King Henry, and Edward, the eldest brother, was in prime position to be able to take the throne from Henry as a result.
Alright, so how does Richard become king then? We've got Edward on the throne.
Yes, well, Edward IV had many children with his queen, Elizabeth Woodville, including 2 sons, the younger Edward, who would become Edward V, and another son, also called Richard. Edward IV, however, died unexpectedly in April 1483. He was expected to leave the throne to his eldest son without any more civil conflict, but he died when Edward V was only 12 years old, and Richard was even younger at 9 years old.
That's Richard, his son, not Richard III.
Yes, Richard's a bit older than this now.
Yes. Just like a 9-year-old, like locking his siblings in the tower, and I will become king.
Give it a few more years, and that isn't too far off. Really plausible, actually.
Now I'm imagining like Chibi Richard.
Oh my god, I would totally want to draw that. Chibi Richard. Very angry-looking little Richard, like Grumpy the Care Bear. Throughout Edward IV's reign, Richard III had displayed fierce loyalty to his brother. This was opposed to their other brother, Clarence, who had decided to try to snatch the throne for himself in the 1460s. Edward actually found him so troublesome that he had Clarence drowned in 1478 in a barrel of his favourite wine.
Oof.
Family Christmases were very awkward. I know that sounds bad, but, you know, this was the 1400s, and, you know, we won't let that stuff fly these days, you know. I mean, cancel culture and all that. Richard III had been made responsible for the north of England during Edward IV's reign, and was held in very high regard. It would have come as no surprise that Edward had made him Lord Protector in his will. This basically would have given Richard the powers of a king. He'd exercise this power on behalf of Edward V until the younger Edward was considered of age to exert it in his own right. But things started to go wrong almost immediately, because the Queen's family, the Woodvilles, were pressing for a coronation as soon as possible. Once a king was crowned, there would be no reason for a protector, and Richard would be pushed out of the sphere of influence. The Woodville family already had a reputation of being overly ambitious and greedy. There were rumours that Elizabeth and her mother had used witchcraft on Edward IV to trick him into marrying her.
I'm just like any modern woman, trying to have it all. A loving husband, a family. It's just I wish I had more time to seek out the dark forces and join their hellish crusade.
We've got that old 1400s misogyny going on here.
Yeah, anything you don't like a bit, be like, she's a witch. She did something good, it's because she's a witch.
Yeah.
Woman exists, witch.
Yeah.
An old ally of Edward IV's, William Hastings, wanted to respect his dead friend's wishes, and instead sent a message to Richard III up in the north to come down to London as soon as possible, as he had been made protector. While still a prince, Edward V had been sent off to learn the ways of kingship in Wales. This had been under the guardianship of his maternal uncle, Anthony Woodville, the Earl Rivers, along with his elder half-brother from his mother's previous marriage, Richard Grey. You'd think they'd have baby name books by this point in history, but I guess not.
Just everybody's called either Richard or Edward.
Yeah, well, we've got to name our boy Richard after the grandfather, and oh wait, the father's also called Richard, so another one.
You can't just name every child after their grandfather. Like most grandfathers, on average, are going to have probably more than one grandson.
Oh,
You have an exponential growth of Richards. It's not sustainable.
no, as we shall see. Upon Edward IV's death, Grey and Rivers decided, as instructed, to take Edward V from Wales down to London, but were intercepted on their way by Richard III. Things started off fine at first, until Richard, seemingly out of nowhere, decided to accuse Rivers and Grey of planning to assassinate him, at which point Richard III had them both dragged out and beheaded.
Ah, yes. In order to ensure that no assassinations took place.
Yes, this will be a totally bloodless succession. God damn it, and I'll kill anyone who says otherwise. This was despite the protests of the young Edward V, who, he'd been sent to Wales when he was about 3 years old. He'd basically been raised by Rivers and Grey. So, as you can imagine, he probably wouldn't have been very happy with Richard III.
Yeah, no, this guy's just killed his parents.
Basically, two of his parental figures, not long after his actual father had died.
Yeah.
Having royally put his foot in it, Richard III sent word to his supporters in the north to send armed men on horseback to meet him in London. Once he'd sent those letters, there would be no time to back out of confronting the Woodvilles. Whether he had his army with him or not, there was going to be a skirmish. Hastings did assure the council, which is the group of noblemen who are given the task of advising the king on matters of state, that Richard wouldn't be causing any more trouble after the Grey Rivers incident. Seemingly unaware that Richard III had already sent these letters up to the north, already escalating things further. Turns out Hastings put his faith in the wrong man, because Richard III came down to London and called a rather sudden meeting of the council at the Tower of London. And it was at this meeting that Richard III then accused Hastings of trying to murder him with the help of the Woodvilles. And before basically anyone could do anything about it, Richard had Hastings dragged outside and beheaded as well.
I'm sensing a pattern here.
Yep, I don't think he's necessarily thinking this through. A lot of sudden actions out of fear, and then having to just kind of roll with it and continue, because what else is he going to do now? I wouldn't like to be Richard right now.
Yeah. Is this a Henry VIII thing where he had brain damage?
No, this is, I definitely say this is a product of the time period. Even with the chaos unfolding, Edward V was still set to be crowned, though of course this didn't happen. It was at this time that Richard III brought to light an accusation that before Edward IV had married his queen, Elizabeth Woodville, the mother of his supposedly legitimate children, he'd already been secretly married to another woman called Eleanor Talbot. Eleanor was the daughter of an earl. She married a man called Thomas Butler as a teenager and died in 1468. Butler died prior to 1461, and it's rumoured at some point after this time, but before 1464, that Eleanor married Edward IV. It was in 1464 that Edward married Elizabeth Woodville. It was on this basis that Richard III had an Act of Parliament called Titulus Regius declare Edward IV's children with Elizabeth Woodville illegitimate, thus barring them all from succeeding the throne. Elizabeth was no longer considered to have been Edward's true wife. Edward IV had already barred Clarence's children from the throne back when their father was executed. And now with all of Edward IV's children also named illegitimate, Richard III was the only eligible member of the House of York left to possibly be king. With no one in the immediate royal family remaining, the nobles petitioned Richard III to take his rightful place on the throne, which he did.
Rightful.
Yes, open to interpretation.
So what's your take on all of this?
Well, on the surface, there might seem like there's some weight to the allegations that Edward IV was a bigamist, because he'd already proven that he'd be willing to conduct a secret marriage. He'd actually done this at least once before. Elizabeth Woodville had been widowed just 3 years before Edward IV married her in secret. It was only when Edward's government was in the middle of negotiations for him to have a marriage to a foreign princess that Edward IV had to come clean that he was no longer available.
Oof. So he's got previous then. It would not be the first secret marriage he'd had.
That doesn't help his case, does it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess if he came clean about one secret marriage, then maybe he would have, wouldn't have had. I mean, how many secret marriages can one man have?
Especially someone who's in this position of power. You think eventually there'd be enough people who knew the secret to be like, excuse me, like,
yeah,
your fourth and fifth wives are also waiting in the wings.
Yeah, it's like the moon landing thing. It's like the number of people who would have to know about it and also keep their mouth shut is enough that it would have come out.
It didn't help that Edward IV was a known womanizer. He acknowledged at least 3 illegitimate children during his marriage to Elizabeth Woodville and kept many mistresses.
This is incredible. It's God's most wondrous miracle.
Sir, I think your wife wants to hold the baby.
My wife? Where? Where?
So we know he definitely couldn't stay faithful to one woman. Very in character for him. The most effective lies are based on truth. Richard III himself would have been a child around the time Edward IV apparently married Eleanor. Maybe Richard did believe this story. I mean, why wouldn't he? He doesn't know what his womanizing brother got up to back then. However, the man who came forward, apparently to Richard III, with this information of a secret marriage, was a man called Robert Stillington. He was the Bishop of Bath and Wells. He claimed to have performed the marriage ceremony between Edward IV and Eleanor. But Stillington didn't have a great reputation with Edward IV. He'd actually been briefly imprisoned in 1478 for being involved in Clarence's rebellion. So you have to kind of question his motives. Why did he wait this long to bring it up? Especially when he had beef with Edward while he was alive.
Yeah. Also, would Edward have trusted him to do the ceremony then?
Well, this marriage is meant to have happened in the 1460s, sometime before Clarence was executed, at least 10 years, I'd say.
Okay.
But still, Stillington doesn't seem to have been given any, unexplained amount of wealth or privilege after this date, which I can't help but think if you wanted someone to keep a big secret like that, you'd probably give them a few bribes.
Yeah.
Instead of putting them in prison when they became a bit problematic.
Can you smell that? What is that? Sheep, is it? It's cows? No, I know what it is. It's bullshit.
A disgruntled former associate with an axe to grind, then, you reckon?
Yeah, suddenly it doesn't look so clear-cut to me. Stillington only made this allegation public once Edward IV had already died. He could have easily used this secret as ammunition back in the 1470s to say that Edward IV was an unfit king and question his moral character, but evidently he never did. It seems suspect that Stillington was the only witness who came forward about the secret marriage, because Eleanor was still alive in 1465 when Elizabeth Woodville was crowned with great pomp and ceremony. Despite this, neither Eleanor or her family ever came forward to reveal what was apparently the truth, that she was actually the rightful Queen of England. The accusations of bigamy never saw the inside of an ecclesiastical court. In matters such as these, it was proper practice that members of the clergy would decide its outcome, but Richard never put this forward to the church. I guess you could say Richard III started off a long, proud English tradition of aggravating the Catholic Church. Richard III also had motive to remove Edward IV's children from the line of succession, since he had not long ago had Rivers and Grey beheaded. Edward V was 12 years old. He had protested strongly at Richard's behaviour in regards to them. Edward V clearly had a mind of his own. And there was no set period as to when someone had to give up the role of protector. So Richard III's time was arguably already running out. Now that he had publicly made himself an enemy of the Woodvilles, it would come of no surprise to anyone if Edward V became king and immediately took Richard's head off as well. Richard III probably saw removing his nephews as a preemptive strike to save himself. I definitely don't think he was planning on becoming king when Edward IV initially died. But once he'd made the mistake of jumping to conclusions and having members of the new king's family executed, he probably didn't feel like he had much of a choice than to make himself king. It was the only way to protect himself from the Woodville's wrath.
When there was a power vacuum, a struggle was bound to ensue. If Richard III hadn't feared for his life, had Edward V been an adult when his father died, Richard would have never set his sights on the throne. Richard III tried to avoid a premature, violent death, but only stalled it for a few years, ruining his reputation in the process and elevating himself from a footnote in history. The Middle Ages in general was categorized by this constant uncertainty. Just because you were close to the throne, or on it, didn't mean that your position was secure. It was just as hard to maintain your position as it was to win it in the first place. Richard III's sudden rise and fall is important as this case study of medieval politics in England.
Richard III's excuse that everyone was plotting against him doesn't hold up to scrutiny either. He never gave any real evidence to anyone that Hastings was plotting against him. He didn't treat Hastings as a traitor after his death either. Richard III actually had Hastings buried in St George's Chapel at Windsor, as he had requested in his will, right next to Edward IV. Personally, if I had accused someone of one of the worst crimes imaginable in the medieval period, I wouldn't bury him next to my brother, who was also the divinely appointed king. I can't help but think that Richard was feeling guilty that he had basically had an innocent man put to death. There probably wasn't any plot, and Richard deep down knew this, and he was trying to make up for this fact. Hastings had always been incredibly loyal to Edward IV, even if he didn't like the Woodvilles. I can imagine Hastings would have been determined to see Edward IV's son put on the throne, one way or another, and would have put up a roadblock to Richard's plans.
Hastings really should have been Richard's ally. Hastings had been devoted to Edward IV, as Richard had been, and Hastings had told Richard that he'd been made protector, Besides, at the council meeting immediately after Edward IV's death, Hastings had managed to argue for Rivers to come down to London with no more than 2,000 men. Rivers had agreed, that actually made attempts to ease the fears of a Woodville takeover. If they'd been planning to assassinate Richard all along, then surely this would have made it more difficult. Rivers had been a popular man at court, and seemed to have been viewed as the one good Woodville. Even the contemporary chronicler Dominic Mancini, who was highly critical of the Woodvilles, described Rivers as a kind, serious, and just man, who had injured nobody, though benefiting many. It's funny, in a sad sort of way. Rivers, Hastings, and Richard III seemed like similar men, loyal and honourable. You might have expected them to be on the same side.
So, while committing bigamy seems very much in character for Edward IV, I don't think there's any good evidence that he had an official marriage to Eleanor Talbot. The nobles petitioned Richard III to become king, which might indicate that they genuinely believed all these stories about plots to kill Richard and illegitimacy. But really, I don't think they would have had any other choice at this point. Richard III had already removed quite a few very powerful, important nobles.
And when you say removed...
I fear no uncle's dead.
No, none that live, I hope. The hour of death is expiate.
Fred, we give our guiltless blood to...
With the recent history of nobles rising against the king in bloody conflicts, I can understand why Richard III did what he did. I don't think he was, as you might imagine in Shakespeare, to be this Machiavellian schemer who always wanted the throne and deliberately set out to kill innocent people. I think these were the actions of a desperate man who knew that no good things could come from this situation. Is it weird that I've just spent all this time talking about how Richard III killed a load of people but still feel kind of sorry for him?
A little bit. Wasn't the point of this supposed to be, boo, Richard, bad?
Boo, Richard doesn't deserve a fan base, but also, poor sod.
Boo, Richard, complicated?
Yes. Everything is a shade of grey.
Speaking of reputations, Richard's fangirls drive me nuts. Sorry, I get educating people past the myth, but just because he wasn't born with a full set of teeth, like John Roos claimed, doesn't mean he was a saint. I mean, I get it. Richard III's been accused of many crimes, and he's certainly not guilty of all of them. He didn't poison his wife, he definitely didn't set Clarence up to be executed. Clarence did that all on his own. Richard III was a very able leader in the north, interested in enforcing law and order, and even his most savage critics concede that he was brave in battle. But then there's the unfortunate things people like Philippa Langley from the Richard III Society say. Oh, it doesn't look like the face of a tyrant. I'm sorry, but it doesn't. He's very handsome. It's like you could talk to him, have a conversation with him right now. Thank God that doesn't have unfortunate implications or anything. When you go into an investigation thinking you know the person already, you're just looking for evidence to back up your opinion. A neutral expression looks nice, therefore Richard III was nice? A reconstruction based on a skull isn't going to be scowling with stress lines now, is it? Is she trying to say that only ugly people do ugly things? Historical fiction, like Shakespeare, takes liberties for entertainment. There shouldn't be a gotcha moment here. Anyway, I'm way off topic here. What was I saying?
Still don't like the Richard III Society. Okay, but did he kill the princes in the tower?
He did, he totally did. I'm sorry, he totally did.